Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew Coonrod, and I'm with the Bucks IU. And we're going to be getting started on this session. I'm going to share my screen in a second. Doing that, my co-presenter, Nick, will introduce himself.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out and connecting with us. My name is Nick Polini. I'm with the Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit.
All right. So let me start the actual presentation itself. All right, can everybody see that? Excellent. I see.
Yes, we can.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, we're going to be respectful of people's times here, so we're going to get started. And so what this is this is the next section in the Accelerated Learning Program. I said my name is Andrew Coonrod. I'm with the Bucks County IU. Joining me today is Nick Poloni from the IU5, the Northwest Tri-County IU. So what this is the next stage in the accelerated learning system. This is the program that has been developed through PDE over the last probably 8 or 9 months to truly try and focus on good instruction, good teaching, good learning, in a way of helping this roadmap for equitable school systems. When you are into the when you're looking in the presentation, you will see that this accelerated learning system is a link that will take you directly to PDE's website. And from there, you can follow through and get for information on all parts of the roadmap and the accelerated learning program. So there are 4 key parts of this accelerated learning program. First is the focus on high quality academics. And we have this fostering supportive learning environments, establishing healthy systems conditions, and finally designing a system of scaffolding support. And again, throughout this spring, there have been numerous presentations covering all of these areas. What we're looking at is one section of those. And so what we're focusing on is high quality academics. Remember, this presentation today is actually part of the middle of a 3-part series that deals with a section of high quality academics. All of these topics are extremely involved, extremely in-depth. So we're breaking down into multiple different presentations. So for high quality academics, we're looking at this definition. And what we're focusing on is instructional changes needed for a new school year to cultivate a thriving data culture to ensure every student has access to instructional strategies, resources, and supports necessary to successfully engage with and master grade level content. When we're looking at this, the idea that we're focusing on here is this idea of making sure we have access to, every student has access to these instructional strategies and the resources necessary, okay? These are the parts that we're really gonna be focusing on and successfully engaging with and mastering grade level content. Some of this is really gonna come through with the plans that we create. So, like I said, that this session here is part of a 3-part series and really focusing mostly on assessment. So in looking at this idea of assessment, we know that with high quality academics, we deal with assessment, we deal with analyzing and interpreting, we deal with instruction and reflecting and monitoring and sharing out. What we're looking at here is truly with the assessment is how do we develop a balanced approach to using formal and informal assessments, classroom-based evidence, showing growth over time, and involving students in the evaluation of the work. This balanced approach is really what we're kind of trying to get into today with this lesson plan and ideas of, or sorry, that's not lesson plan, assessment plan. So again, with assessment, there's three major components that we're going to be looking at with this assessment system. One, as we see in this thing here, is a balanced approach. Two, evidence showing growth over time. So classroom-based evidence showing growth over time. And then three is involving students in their own evaluation. The question that we have here, and we're going to ask for people in the chat to kind of just initially put out there, is taking a look at why should we take a look at this as a systems approach. So what I want to do is just take just a minute or two here, and we're going to try if anybody's ever tried the waterfall approach to doing chat. So what the waterfall is I want you to type in your response to the question or your ideas and hold on. And when we say go, then everybody hit enter and we'll get them all coming through at one time. We get an idea of what different people are thinking. So the question is, why should we do a system approach to assessments? Okay, so let's do the waterfall chat and see what everybody has to say. So go ahead and enter and see what we've got in the chat. Consistency. So schools have a better idea to build consistency within building or district. Systematic assessments provide the clearest data related to the student learning. To have continuity within the building. And consistency, again and again, consistency. Excellent. So schools have a better understanding of student performance across a broader scope. A system approach allows teachers to gauge student learning in real time and adjust instruction as necessary in order to attain mastery. Okay, so all of those are excellent and all of those are right on the money in terms of why we're doing this approach here. So what does that really mean for us? Where do we go from here? Okay. So this presentation, like I said, is part of 3. So on Tuesday, Nick led us through the presentation on assessment, literacy, and designing local assessments. So that was the first part of really getting into how do you design valid and reliable assessments that truly measure both content and rigor of what students are doing and know how to use the data from those. Today, we're taking a look at creating a local assessment plan. And what does that involve? How do we organize when we're assessing students and what we're assessing the students on? And then next Tuesday, we're going to go over the ideas of data and pretty much how do we systematically look at our data? How do we discuss our data? What's the policies and systems we put in place to really to explore the data of these assessments and make them a part of our instructional practice? So creating a local assessment plan. What we're going to focus on today is understanding what an assessment plan is. And for the most part, we're going to be focusing on the assessment planning in terms of what it looks like for a teacher in a classroom or within a department. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll also touch on what a broader district level assessment plan might look like and calendar with that as well. So we're going to take a look at why an assessment plan is a key component of a highly developed assessment system and the essential parts of an assessment plan and how you go about starting to create them. Oh, thanks, Kelly. I'll try and get a little bit closer at the end, see if I can scrounge up a pair of headphones. Is this working better for people for the sound?
Okay. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I just have to remember to kind of sit still and actually talking to the computer as opposed to bouncing out like I normally do. All right. So I think after a year and a half, I'd be okay with presenting sitting still as opposed to wandering around a room. So now we're going to really focus on what we're going to be doing. So what is an assessment plan? Okay. Basic definition, it is a document that outlines student learning goals to be assessed in any given course. It's a document that captures the structure of future evaluation. Okay. Kind of more specific, what we see in an assessment plan, okay, is that it outlines learning outcomes, methods used to demonstrate attainment, explanation and sources and uses of data, indication of which outcomes are addressed by which method, and intervals at which data are collected and reviewed. So now, what does this really look like? So these are different kind of components we're looking for. So learning outcomes. As we're going through this, you'll see this different components. And I'm going to be, most of this is going to be through questions. When we get to the actual creation of a lesson plan, you're going to see that it's a very generalized what I've provided, because it's very much something that you create with your teachers and with your departments or in your schools. But student learning outcomes, when you start to look at this, you should really kind of approach this through the kind of the mindset of the understanding by design. And so we're taking a look at what standards are being covered and with which assessments. Do you have priority standards? And are they included? Are the same standards covered in different types of assessments? And do outcomes in the plan align with your curriculum course goals? So we're focusing really here on student learning outcomes. What do we want our students to know and be able to do? Okay. Where this kind of comes into place with the planning is, as we're figuring out what we want our students to know and be able to do, what do we start with, what's the end point, and where are our checkpoints throughout the year? So the outcomes is one component. What do we want our students to know and be able to do? The next is our methods. And the questions we're asking there are, how are different methods of assessment being used? For example, summative assessments, traditional tests, quizzes. Are we using essays, portfolios, performance measures? How are we assessing what we're doing? Is there alignment between what's being done formatively and summative assessments? So if you have a lesson that takes 2-3 days to get through, is there a formative assessment in there with which you use to gauge student understanding and adjust instruction and differentiate instruction? And how is that aligned to the summative assessment at the end, where every student is going to be showing what they know and be able to do? Do assessments reflect the multiple means of expression? Remember, assessments also should be showing and using some of the principles out of universal design for learning, where we know that students learn in different ways. We know that students express themselves in different ways. Do your assessments show that as well? The idea of an assessment plan is that you get a good look at a year and see how are things being done. Just like when Nick was talking about on Tuesday with looking at an individual assessment and saying, okay, if I'm looking back at create my assessment, I look back and I realize that all my questions or 95% of my questions are at the level 1 of rigor. I need to take a step back and really adjust the types of questions I'm asking. With an assessment plan, you're taking a look and saying, okay, I've done my assessment plan. I look it out and realize that now 95% of the way that I'm assessing my students is a standard multiple choice assessment. Do I need to adjust that? Do I need to find ways to create different methods for students to show what they know and are able to do? So when we're taking a look at this, the next kind of question we're going to be throwing out there, again, for the same waterfall chat, is what are different ways that we can use to assess students? So what are some different methods that we'd have for assessing students? I'll give you a minute or two to put those down in the chat, and then we'll do the waterfall and see what people have come up with. Okay, so let's take a look now. What are, go ahead and enter your things in. Okay, so let's see. Exit ticket, tests, quizzes, projects, essays, portfolios, whiteboards. Most use of formative assessment strategies are really summative, CDTs. Formative, ticket out the door, endnote, summative, benchmark, exit tickets, tests, quizzes, projects, portfolios, whiteboards. Formative assessment strategies are summative in the way that they are used. CDTs, project-based. Okay. Yes, all of these are different ways in which we assess kids. And remembering that sometimes the assessments are also, like we said, we talk about performance-based. Depending on the subject and where you're trying to get and what you're trying to, your end result will determine in some ways the format of the assessment. They'll also determine in some ways, as we're looking through the formative assessments, what goes on in there. So these are the questions you want your teachers to be asking. So as you're going through and creating these assessment plans, the first thing you're going to be taking a look at, again, like we talked about, was the outcomes. What do you want students to know and be able to do? The next part is the methods. How are you going to get them to show that? Is there a balance in that? Is there difference in how you're having students know and show what they're able to do? Does everything one type of assessment? So these are the questions you want to make sure that, again, you're reaching all students and giving all students this access to this quality education and understanding and knowing and be able to show they've mastered the standards. Okay. Assessment data. So oops, sorry, I think I went one too many slides. I apologize for this. I think I just went one too many slides. No. I'll make this work from what I've got here. Apologize for that. So assessment data. Where will the data from the assessments be collected? So how are you going to collect that data? And how will the data be used? I'm just going to check to see if we got it. Nope, it didn't. Okay, there's a missing slide here, and I'll fix it back in the presentation. I'm not sure where it happened. When we're actually looking at data, and I'm just going to put this out there, and then I'll send you the slide later. There's two different components of the data that we're going to be looking at. So when you're creating an assessment plan, the first part is kind of the data you're looking at before your kids ever walk into your classroom or log in for the first time on Zoom for that year. And so this is the kind of our sources and uses of data. And the first thing is kind of like, what are the data that are being used to inform your assessment plan? We're talking previous year's data, trends in data, PVAS data, your growth measures, your reflections on previous year's assessments. So you not only have previous year's data from the students you're going to be having, but also historically, how have students done in your classroom? What are the growth measures been looking like? How have your students done on different standards? Because what you're going to be taking a look at is, are there certain standards or content that maybe aren't covered as well, or your students aren't doing as well on? How are you going to assess those? Are there data, certain standards that you might need to address in multiple ways and multiple times throughout the year? And how are you going to use this data to inform plan development? The kind of strengths and challenges that you have based off historical data. How can the timing and alignment of the assessments be adjusted to meet your students' needs? So what we're taking a look at here is, like right now, you can go look and you can see, like for PSSA data, Keystone data, you can go back 4 years, 5 years, and see data and how students are doing based off of content and assessment anchors. You can use that to inform some of your instruction and some of your assessment plans in terms of what are we doing and how are we doing it. You take a look at how what are the data showing about the value of certain standards. For example, we all know that in the PSSAs for grades 4 through 8, the text-dependent analysis essay makes up about 25% of the points available on that assessment. That's not a standard you're going to be addressing at just one point in the year. That's a performance measure that you really want your students to be addressing multiple times throughout the year. How are you going to make sure that your students know and are able to demonstrate their ability to answer a text-dependent analysis essay? It's not going to be a one size and one chance fit all based off of your knowledge of the data of the value that that one has. So all of these previous year's data will affect how you create your plan. Now, when you're creating the plan, obviously the initial step is going to be what you get done before school starts. And you're going to have a good outline of when you're assessing students, how you're assessing them, what's in there before the start of the school year. Then, once the school year starts, that's when you get to this page. And this is during the year, okay? As you give these different assessments. Let's say in the beginning of September, you offer a CDT, like Nick pointed out, okay? Based off the CDT results, are you adjusting some of your time frame and how you're assessing your students? As you give unit tests, chapter tests, what impact are they having on your adaptation of your plan? There's going to be some adaptations to the plan. There always will be adaptations. There needs to be, because you're trying to meet the needs of the students you have in front of you. So as you're creating these plans, the first section of data you're looking at is, what are all your historical data telling you? What is your experience and your data showing that you should know for how do you set this plan up for the year? What's going to be covered roughly when? How's this going to happen? The next part is, once that's in place, now the students are in your class. Now you have real-time data on how your current students are doing. You're adjusting those plans to meet those students' needs. Okay, so now, once we've gotten the components and what's created in there, now you have to look at timing. When will the different assessments be given? Here's where you're really going to start pulling in a lot of the understanding by design principles. So when we start thinking about it, the first thing we're thinking about is, what is the large summative assessments and the smaller assessments that scaffold up to them? So we start backwards. We're starting with, what does the end of the year look like? What do we want our students to know and be able to do by the end of the school year? And how are we going to know that at the end of the school year? Is it a final exam? Is there a final project? Is it the PSSA, a Keystone exam, a portfolio? What's going to be covered on that final? What's going to be covered at the end of the year to say that, yes, the kids who were in this class this year understood and are able to perform? Then we have to think about what's needed to happen throughout the year to get them to that point. So what are the different units? What are the different breakdowns, sections you want to call them, that get you to that end of the year? Then as you're looking at timing, then you have to start looking at considerations outside of just your initial curriculum. When are the different marking periods and semesters? When do they end? What are dates for vacations and major school events? Probably don't want to plan a major assessment the day before the winter break. Maybe you don't want to plan for right when kids come back. So you're going to make allowances for when things are going to be happening. Horizontal alignments. If they're common assessments, some of these are going to be set then in your assessment calendar and your assessment plan from the very beginning. We all know we're going to give the midterm at this time and the final at this time. You're also going to be taking a look at other subject areas for the secondary level. So if you're a secondary teacher, do you want to try and when you're looking at your timing for an assessment? Maybe you want to try and look and find out, okay, if I'm giving a major paper, let's say in a history class, a research paper, when is the English teacher doing a research paper in their class? You want to make sure that they're at different times so that the students aren't overlapping. You're not overwhelmed. Same thing, you don't want to have students have major assessments all on the same day. So you want to stagger these out, and this is going to be the collaboration that you have with a team. So these are things to kind of think about and go through. All of this stuff is going to come into place. So when you're creating your assessment plans, the first part you start with is, again, what do students know and need to know and be able to do at the end of the year? Then you're breaking it down. What are the components that fit into that? Then you start taking a look at, okay, now that I've got your general ideas of when things are happening, when do the specific things need to happen based off of considerations outside of your classroom? So that gets us through kind of what's covered and when it's covered. Okay. The question comes then to, why do we even bother with this? Okay. Why have an assessment plan? And it's a key component of a highly developed assessment system. We talked at the beginning, we really talked about this assessment planning being a part of a system. The idea is that a really effective assessment plan focuses efforts on student outcomes and the transfer of knowledge and skills. When we create an assessment plan, and we do it especially using some of these UBD principles, we're really getting into the idea of what is the end goal? And the end goal is, how have we transferred our knowledge and skills to our students? How have our students learned the content and the skills that they need, they're supposed to go through? And how do we know that they're doing that? So what does it look like? The assessment plan itself also provides then a tool to review and compare progress to desired result. If things are working well, great. How did you do that? How can you replicate that? If they're not working well, where did the wheels fall off the bus? Okay, where did things happen? So that you can learn and make fixes to it and adjust to meet the needs of your kids. The assessment plan allows a lot of that to happen. It helps kind of really focus and bring things back and make sure that it's actually a deliberate decisions that are being made, as opposed to, hey, I've been teaching this for the last, I need to test my kids on it, so I'm going to go from there. The assessment plan starts with, what do I want the kids to know? And then how do we build out from that direction? So as we talked about, some of the basic tenets of understanding by design really apply to this. And so I just kind of paraphrase this, throwing in assessment as opposed to planning, but the concept is the exact same. You know, learning is enhanced when teachers think purposely about assessment planning. When they really put that effort into thinking about how they're creating their assessments, like we talked about with assessment literacy, but when those assessments fall and how those assessments fit into the larger scheme of the curriculum. And assessment planning also helps focus curriculum and teaching on student understanding. When we think about the 3 stages of understanding by design, remember the first stage of UBD is identifying desired results. Where do we want the students to be? The second stage is determining acceptable evidence. So what are the assessments going to be looking like? And then the third is planning learning experiences. So with assessment planning, we're really getting through numbers 1 and 2. We're getting at these, what are our desired results? What is the acceptable evidence? And then we're planning out when all of that's going to happen so that it makes sense. Remember also with the assessment planning, just like in UBD, it's the idea of the last thing we want to have happen is it gets to be April, early May, and you realize you've got 12 weeks of content and about 3 weeks worth of instruction time left. The idea with the assessment planning is it's laid out for the year. You have your checkpoints and you know where you need to be at any given point in time within a general sense to make sure that content be covered intentionally and done well, and you're making allowances for your student needs. So all of that gets into, again, what an assessment plan is, what are the components of it, why we have assessment plans, why assessment plans are kind of needed for good instruction. The next part is how do we create some of the basic steps that need to be completed. First step, again, is of course, what is being assessed? What do we need to cover? Again, going to that, the ideas of what we want students to know and be able to do at the end of a school year. The next is when. When do we throw these things in there? So as we're creating this, now we got to start plugging in time frames. For certain assessments, it's going to be a specific time. There'll be an assessment determined by a state assessment, PSSA's Keystone, and there will be a specific time in there. For some, you might do it as a time frame. Okay, we need to have the unit test done by the end of the first unit or the end of the first marking period, so it needs to be done by the end of the first week of November. That's the plan we're shooting for. And you've got some time frame to adjust for student learning and for reteaching if necessary, for differentiating the instruction as it's going through. And then also 3 is how is it being assessed? So how are we going to know the students are where they need to be? So what is being assessed? When we build an assessment plan, start with a list of the priority standards. What are the most important things students need to know and be able to do by the time they walk out of the class at the end of the school year or the end of the course? And what's that expected transfer of knowledge? So that understanding, the key understanding, not just what facts can they memorize, but do they understand why those facts take place? Do they understand the connections between them? They understand not only to what the formulas are for math, but how to apply those formulas and how they fit into problem solving in general. If they're learning music, do they understand not only just how to hit the keys in the right time and right place, but they understand how to read the music and understand what's going into the music. Social studies, they understand the themes besides just the dates. So what is the expected transfer of knowledge and skills? How can the students show that they've understood what they're working on? So then the next step would be basically after you compile this list of what students are expected to learn, then how do you divide that content? What makes sense for dividing that content over the length of the course? Is there going to be a final assessment, a midterm or mid-course assessment? Are there unit assessments? Are there chapter assessments? Do you need to make changes on the length and the size of these assessments based on where your kids are? The content that you're covering, is it covered only one time? Or is it content that you're circling back to throughout different points in the year to help broaden and deepen the understanding of that content? When? So for timing and content assessment should be intertwined with the curriculum. When you're doing this, obviously start with a review of the school academic calendar. Like we talked about, end of year dates, marking period semester dates, vacations, when are state and school assessments happening? And then the curriculum for general timeframes for units, units of study and assessments. All of these things need to be factored into it. And again, an ideal plan is one that you can create most of this and have a very good outline, a solid outline of what's going to be happening before the kids ever start at the beginning of the year. You can then make adjustments based on how your students do with your initial assessments, with diagnostic and benchmarking assessments that might be given at the beginning of the year. Again, obviously, when you're looking at when review for general conflicts, communicate with colleagues to avoid overlap of high value assessments, like we talked about. I know when I was teaching at the high school, I always tried to make sure I didn't give an assessment on the day of the homecoming parade, because that just seemed to kind of be, not the best results that I was going to get. Kids were focused on everything else except for what was going on in the classroom. What are some of those key things that you're going to want to avoid? And again, we talk with the colleagues and make sure we're kind of aligned as much as possible, so that we're not overloading the students, giving them all unit tests or all things at the same time. We want the students to be able to show what they can do, and give it their best effort. So we want to make sure that they're not having to do 2 papers at the same time or study for 2 major essays. At the elementary, it's a little bit easier because at least the same teacher is covering all those topics, but they're still going to want to coordinate with how things are going and maybe coordinate with their colleagues to get people on the same track. How will the student outcomes be assessed? So again, once you've determined what outcomes will be assessed and where those are going to occur within the curriculum and the school year, then what's the type of assessment? How are those students going to show what they know and are able to do? The 2 general topic ideas are performance tasks, researching essays, projects, problem-based. And then there's the traditional, which are your quizzes, your tests, observations. Where do those fall within there? So then when you're looking at the plan and you're looking at it over the course of the year and a unit of study, what are the questions that need to be made? Questions you need to be asking, and these years as your teachers are creating these assessment plans for their year. Are there multiple means of expression for students to demonstrate the transfer of their knowledge? Or is it all just simply standard assessments, multiple choice tests? Is there alignment between formative and summative assessments? As you've gone through, do the formative assessments build up to the summative assessments? Do you have formative assessments that are built in where you know that this is a section, this is a key tipping point, pivot point within a lesson? And the lesson could be a 1-period lesson or a 1-day lesson, or it could be a 3-day lesson or a week-long lesson. But are there certain pivot points in there where you have a formative assessment built in and you know that you're going to be potentially differentiating the instruction after that pivot point to get the kids ready for the summative assessment that's going to come later? Are they tied into that? Is there an alignment between the assessment format, between local assessments and state mandated assessments? So are you working with your students to make sure they understand the format of a text-dependent analysis essay or a DBQ essay for the AP at the social studies level? Are there different ways in which the students are going to be assessed? And is there an agreement between some of what you're covering in the class and other assessments? All of these are the considerations that you're going to be wanting to be walking your teachers through. As you've probably realized with assessment planning, it's a series of getting an idea out there, getting the plans out, and then start asking the questions to make sure that it's the best plan for your students to demonstrate their learning. So a general template. This is, again, a very general template. I'm going to pull it up here. And let's see if everybody can stop sharing, and I'll reshare the new template. While we're getting this up, are there questions that people have? Been talking a lot this morning.
I don't see anything in the chat, Andrew.
Okay. So I'm going to share a general template. This is just a general template off of a kind of a broad generalized scope. In reality, when you're creating your lesson plan or your assessment plans for the year, it's a good idea to figure out what's going to work best for your situation, for your school, and for your teachers. It might look slightly different between the high school and the middle school, or between secondary and elementary. So let me share the screen and so you'll see here, again, here's a very generalized template. Assessment name, in this case, 8th grade PSSA. The standards, here's what's covered on the 8th grade PSSA here in row B or column B. And in this is what is assessed. Expected outcome, okay? In this case, students will be able to demonstrate at least proficiency on the state assessment. When? Well, we know the assessment calendar, it's already set. So it's between May 2nd and 13th of 2022 for the math assessments for PSSAs. It's not a performance, it's a summative state assessment. So now what gets us to that? And so I created, well, maybe unit 1 is based off of numbers and operations. This standard AN1. And so I'm saying that, okay, by October 15th, we're going to have the unit test on this. By October 10th, I want to have a project done by this. And I haven't really looked at how they're going to be done yet. That doesn't need to be in this assessment plan. That comes more with the assessment literacy that Nick was talking about on Tuesday. But we know at least that this is what's going to be covered and when it's going to be covered. I've set up an end dates of kind of when I want these to happen, but there's some flexibility to deal with anything that comes along that might throw a monkey wrench in the works or upend the plan. So that's unit 1. You see I've broken unit 1 down into whether it was sections or chapters, and in the different standards covered by those. I threw in some dates of when that would be. By September 10th, I wanted to have this done. And then I created some formative assessments for different lessons along the way. This is one general format that can be used. And then you could go through and create them for each one. But now you've got a bird's eye view of what's being offered when, what standards are being covered when. Questions about this general format? Pull up the chat. Do we have diagnostic tools in there? So that would come through, Mike. In the initial stages, teachers would most likely be creating their plans as they go through. Although you did ask about diagnostics. If you notice up here, at the top under row 6, I put in the 8th grade math CDT. And I did it, when is the assessment? Generally, I put down September 1st just to be at the beginning of the year as a diagnostic. So as a teacher, what I would suggest is going through, knowing when these are going to happen. If your students are doing a CDTs, a lot of times those are organized at the school level or the district level. If they're not, and it's up to each teacher, then figure out where it fits best within your calendar, okay? I decided I was going to, for this example, I was just going to have it as, okay, the district has decided that during the first week of school, there was going to be the CDT so that everybody would know where the students stood and you could have those results to then make adaptations. But you can add them kind of whatever it fits. Some districts will put them in a little bit later. Teachers will do either a full diagnostic or they'll do content area diagnostics depending on where they are. And as you're building this out, you can get ideas of about when things should be happening and where they fit to make sure that by the end of the year, that all the standards that are supposed to have been covered are covered. Other questions? Okay. One other things that you can be adding in here, I didn't with this generalized plan, but you could do it yourself as well. If you wanted to, would be to, if you notice you're having the assessment by October 15th and, or on October 10th for this unit test for number 1, you could also add in another column here to say data review. And so when are you going to review the data, just to give yourself a reminder as a teacher, or have your teachers remind, when are the data going to be reviewed? That could be up to each department, each teacher or school, depending on the policies that they have set. Parts of this you might want to adjust. And again, like I said, the way that you're doing the assessment plans is you create the initial plan that's kind of laid out like you see here with the generalized dates, what's going to be covered before the kids walk into your classroom. And you have a general time frame and goals to make sure that everything gets covered in the course of the year. As the year goes on and you get access to more data, so PVOS data comes out. In a normal year, we'll get PVOS data at the end of September, early October. That may cause you to adjust when you're going to have, based off of the previous year's growth, how you emphasize certain things or how much time you spend. You might want to adjust some of your calendar. Okay. You can look at previous year's data with PVOS, that's going to help. And then you can look at immediate year and then look at your projections for how kids are going to be doing and use that to make other adjustments as well. So you start with a full one based off of any previous year's data, and then you work on, once you have that plan going, and then as the year goes on and you get access to more data and you get the projections from PVOS, you get PSSA results, you get diagnostic results from that year, you can go make changes to it. But with having the plan in place, it allows you to make sure and not lose sight of getting to that end point of making sure that students know and are able to meet those standards at the end of the year. As we all know, the hard part is once we get teaching, it's really easy to get stuck in the weeds and lose sight of where they need to be by the end of the year until it's near the end of the year and now you're trying to throw as much content as possible at the last minute. Doing an assessment plan and constantly revisiting that assessment plan allows you to kind of keep going back to that 30,000-foot view to make sure that what needs to be covered is being covered and it's being done in a way that best helps the students learn. Questions about that general template? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the presentation. The last, there we go. So that gets us to from assessment planning from a teacher's perspective or like a departmental or grade level perspective. There's also a component of assessment planning that's kind of more at the district level. I want to just take a quick look at that. These are kind of considerations to be done when you're doing a district assessment plan. Obviously, a well-developed district level assessment plan is a critical component for an effective assessment system. Districts need to be able to show that, yes, we're making sure that all of our students, and we have plans to make sure our students achieve the academic standards that have been set out. So what goes into some of those? The components of a district assessment plan, one that would be posted on a website, obviously are the district policies regarding assessments. So some districts mandate common assessments, some don't. Is there a policy for that? Expectations for data discussions and use. Overall expectations for meeting the standards and preparing students for college and career readiness eventually. So what are your district policies? Those should be included in an assessment plan. The calendar. The district should have an assessment calendar. And that calendar is going to be, when are the standardized assessments? Those that get plugged in first thing in terms of all the different state standardized assessments. Diagnostic and benchmark assessments. When are those happening? Whether it's map testing, CDTs, you name it. And then district-based assessments. Okay. So when do those fit in? So when we're talking about these district policies, common assessments, are common assessments required? What grades or subjects use them? What's the frequency and method of common assessment? So when I was teaching up in upstate New York, we just did common assessments for midterm and final exam. So the other ninth grade social studies teacher, he and I would get together, we would go through and build out our common assessments and agree to be at a certain point by the midterm and what was going to be covered on the final. What grades/subjects use common assessments? And then what's the frequency and method of the common assessment? Are all students required to do research papers in English in the 10th grade? Is it required for 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade? They do some kind of research portfolio. Expectations for data discussions and use. Again, this is what are the expectations for how you're going to look at your data, what data you're going to look at, how you're going to discuss that data. Part of what we're going to take a look at next week is going to be those data protocols and different ways you can systemize going through the different data available to schools. And then how are the assessments connected to curriculum and standards? So that's some of the policy work or policy components that need to be in a district assessment plan. The calendar, these are the things to be considering with the calendar. PSSAs, Keystones, PASA, WIDA Access, AP, IB, PSATs. When do these all fit within the calendar? Since the district has this calendar set up, it makes it much easier then for teachers to create their course assessment plans, knowing when these dates are going to be. Same thing with the diagnostic and benchmark assessments. CDTs, map testing, iReady, DIBELS, whatever these assessments are that you're using on a broad, the district's using on a broad scale. When are these happening? Dates need to be out there so again, the teachers can make adjustments around them. So again, the students, again, the whole point is to focus in on what's best for the students and not have things overlap and conflict with each other. And then again, district-based assessments, finals, portfolios, research papers. When are these things supposed to be done that are done at the district level? Once these are set, then the teachers can work on their individual plans. Comments, questions? You guys are going really easy on me this morning. Okay. So the basic our contact information, you'll see there. It's also in the presentation that we sent to you. In the Google Drive, in the folder, there is the copy of the presentation as a PowerPoint, as a PDF, as well as that generalized template that I provided. Again, that's a generalized template, please. I was going through in different ones. There are all kinds of different types, and many of them would fit with one thing, but not another. So it's more of it helps with teachers if they're building it and they understand it and what's going to work best for organization at the school level. Questions, comments? We have kind of time left available. So I'm here for any kind of questions you have, things we can talk through and ways to go through this. But thank you very much, all of you. Oh, and the next one, attendance link. Thank you, Sarah. Pull that back up. Hold on a second. Let me share the screen again, and I'll bring up the attendance link. It's also in the slides that were sent to you, but I'll bring it up here on the main screen. There you go. And Sarah has put in the drive to the resources and the link to the attendance.